Welcome to Khanversations. I'm Muqtedar, your host, and today I'm going to talk to you about Secretary of State Blinken's visit to China. My question for Secretary of State is, what's the point, Anthony? So we will talk about it, but before that, subscribe to Khanversations, like this video, press the bell icon, and don't forget to share it after you watch it. So there seems to be a stream of Western and US diplomats and senior officials going to Beijing. Janet Yellen was there a couple of weeks ago. The president or the chancellor of Germany, Schulz, was there. I've done a conversation on both of those. You can watch them. I will tag them at the end of this video. And now Secretary Blinken is there. This is his second visit to China in the past few months. And he's there essentially to do three things. One is to talk to China about about leveling the playing field, so to speak, to give Western companies the same degree of access to Chinese markets that the Chinese companies enjoy in Europe and the United States. In fact, this has been an issue for more than 20 years that China has, since it joined the WTO and enjoyed the most favored nation status in the US, has had a better access to Western markets than it has allowed Western companies. So as a developing country, it did maintain some degree of protectionism. But now that it is the second biggest economy in the world, it is a very serious competitor in advanced technologies, etc. I think Western countries are demanding that China open its markets. In fact, the Europeans have issued a warning that if China does not give access to European companies, then there will be barriers raised against Chinese companies in Europe. But that's one thing that Blinken is going there to talk about. And number two is China's support to Russia. The last few weeks, there has been a lot of discussion in Western media, especially Western officials, talking about the fact that Chinese companies have been providing dual-purpose technology to Russian companies and thereby indirectly supporting Russia's manufacturing of weapons, which are then being used in Ukraine. I really want to, I wish I could witness how that conversation goes. Blinken would probably tell his counterpart, oh, we just decided to give $61 billion of military aid to Ukraine. In fact, without letting anybody know, we secretly transferred really long-range missiles to Ukraine in the month of March, which are capable of reaching deep into Russia. And now we don't want you to even sell technology which can potentially be used in the military purposes. I would really like to know what China's answer will be to that comment. The third thing that the Western economies are profoundly concerned about is that China has responded to its declining GDP by essentially creating an overcapacity. So Chinese factories are producing more than I guess they can use or even export, and as a result of that, they are selling stuff at a loss and are being subsidized by the government, which is then borrowing money and subsidizing manufacturing, and they are dumping products in Europe and everywhere else at such a low price that local manufacturers everywhere are suffering. So Janet Yellen, when she was there, she was also concerned that Americans will lose a lot of jobs because of the low cost of exports. And it's not just what is being manufactured, the cost of manufacturing, but it's also where China is doing that. China is doing that in green energy areas. So solar cells, electric vehicles, batteries for electric vehicles. So these are the three areas in which there seems to be overcapacity. And these are the areas where both European countries as well as the United States would like to encourage domestic manufacturing. So far, Chinese cars have not entered the US market, but from all I gather, BYD could simply wipe out all American cars. It is just as good as any EV out there, electric vehicle, but it will be much cheaper. So that is the third concern, that basically Blinken is going to say, please manufacture less so that we don't lose jobs. I don't know how the United States can at one point advocate globalization and also talk about free market, and then go to China and then tell China that you should reduce. Yes, the Chinese government is involved, but so is the US government. One of the things that Biden is going to brag about is the CHIPS Act, where the US government is subsidizing manufacturing of advanced chips here in the US. The US government is imposing restrictions on what can be exported to China. So the US government is indulging in a lot of mercantilist policies itself, and I think it's pretty rich. It's like the same thing. The US will criticize Russia for human rights violations, and then when Israel commits the same crimes in Gaza on a much higher scale, the US will then defend it in every forum possible, including the UN Security Council. So this this kind of hypocrisy seems to have become ingredient to US foreign policy. But this particular visit comes at a time when both the economies are not doing really well. So everyone is aware about the Chinese struggle. The Chinese growth has slowed down. This whole business of overcapacity is China's way of basically, kickstarting its economy and trying to raise the GDP growth rate, and it has at least succeeded in the first quarter. China's first quarter growth rate was above 5%, which is far more than what was expected. China was expected to grow at some 4% or something like that. But nevertheless, Chinese economy is very weak, especially in the real estate market, and also there's pretty high unemployment among educated youth. So China is trying its best to increase consumer spending. There is a deflationary nature to its economy, which means prices are actually going down, and people are hesitant to buy. So while domestic demand is low, China is trying to essentially, shall we say, resuscitate its economy through manufacturing exports. The United States had a really bad day today, and I don't know whether I remembered to ask you guys to subscribe to Khanversations. If you have not, please subscribe to the channel. It keeps us going. So today was really a bad day for US economy. Number one, the stock market, the Dow went down by 600 points. So a lot of people have made, and primarily because of the low profits announced by Facebook. Number two, the reports that the United States has not met the expectations of the economists in this quarter. The GDP growth of the US was only 1.6%. There was general consensus among economists on Wall Street and elsewhere who said that the US economy in this particular quarter, the first quarter of 2024, would be 2.4%. That would be a very healthy growth for an economy that is this big, $27 trillion. But its growth rate, GDP growth was much low, 1.6%. Another bad news that came is that inflation is high and is becoming firmer, which means it's going to be much more difficult to bring the inflation rates down. So it's at 3.5%, and the U.S. Federal Bank wants, the Federal Reserve wants it to come down to about 2%. That is what the U.S. likes, but it's still at 3.5%, and it's becoming quite robust at 3.5%. So the fight to reduce it will be much more difficult. The U.S. has raised, the Federal Reserve has raised interest rates 11 times in a row, and it's still, this inflation is not budging. And it has caused other problems. So, for example, the interest rates have really gone up. For example, mortgage rates have crossed 7%. It is unthinkable. I remember 20 plus years ago when I was buying my house in Michigan in 2000. At that time, I had paid over 5.75% for the mortgage of the house, and everyone was saying, "Oh, well, that was a very good deal," because on an average it was about 6% at that time. But I have never seen a mortgage rates over 7% in the last 20 years or so. So that is very unusually high, and that is having a negative impact on the U.S. economy. But there's one good news. The employment situation continues to remain better so the people who are losing jobs and applying for, I guess, unemployment are just around 200,000. So the perception is that the US unemployment rate is low. So in spite of the fact that the GDP growth rate has not been as strong as one expected, inflation is high, interest rates are high, but at least the job market seems to be holding on. So there's one good news, but all of this tells you that especially with US exports down, in fact, there's another interesting development. Ford announced that it had incurred heavy losses on its electronic vehicles. In fact, there's a 50% drop in amount of how many electric vehicles. I think it sold about 10,000 electric vehicles in the current quarter, and before that it sold 20,000, and it has made very high losses on all of these electric vehicles. So the discussion of electric vehicles will be very interesting because the demand for electric vehicles is going down in the US, surprisingly. And because of competition, the prices are going down. Tesla slashed the price by several $1,000s just day before yesterday. So the US economy is not as robust as it was, say, 2 or 3 months ago, at least for the experts. The public continues to feel that the economy is not doing well. And so the inflation is hurting working class people and middle classes in a very severe fashion. But the elite who are looking at macro data, they seem to think that the US economy is doing well, especially when you contrast that to Japan and most of Europe. And also the fact that China is not doing well. So at this moment, what has happened is that because China's economy is not doing well, it seeks to attract foreign investments. It is being more conciliatory in its discourse with the US. And the US, even though its economy is going, the United States seems to be a bit more reckless in its policies. So, for example, Blinken, the day Blinken landed in China, a few hours before that, Joe Biden signed an $8 billion military assistance to Taiwan. So this whole idea that the United States approach towards Taiwan is strategic ambiguity, there is no strategic ambiguity left. The United States is dealing with Taiwan as it is dealing with Ukraine. So this talk that, oh, we have a strategic ambiguity, no, that went down the drain when the United States started providing military and defense assistance to Taiwan. The strategic ambiguity position would be kind of neutrality. So the US has not, I mean, I wonder how that discussion is going to go and saying, oh, we are still maintaining status quo, and yet even though we are continuing to arm Taiwan. So there's also that discussion about China's aggressive naval behavior in the area, and also the United States growing military support to Taiwan. We are just preparing a second Ukraine. I think that is where the United States is moving. So it is going to be an interesting conversation, and also I don't know whether the banning of TikTok is going to come up. And so with the United States going there and saying, oh, please open your markets to us. And by the way, we just banned TikTok, and we are forcing TikTok to sell itself to an American owner. And so it's going to be very interesting that the United States is going to make demands of China, which the United States is not willing to adhere by. So it is very interesting meeting, and if something really substantive comes out of Blinken's, which I don't expect, is just a kind of maintenance that this tension doesn't go to the point that China is willing to break away. And that would simply ruin, because these days America has only two goals, Israel and Ukraine. So they must be thinking, oh my God, if we push China, then China might actually start sending military stuff directly to Russia. I mean, that would be the end of it all, right? So I think that there is an attempt to continue to maintain some kind of diplomatic relations with China while there is aggressive actions being taken against China's economic interest. If you are following the news closely, you find that yesterday in Europe, one of the Chinese companies was raided, which has upset a lot of Chinese companies, and they're beginning to become very nervous about doing business in Europe. So So things are heating up both in the geo-economic arena as well as geopolitical arena, and so this visit to, which I think is going to be quite pointless, like Janet Yellen's visit, just going there and threatening China. Well, you could give a press conference statement here, and that would have the same effect. I have very little expectations from this particular visit from Secretary of State Blinken to China, but we'll see what happens. One of the beauties of international relations is that it surprises, and the people who are most surprised are often the experts. So I look forward to observing what happens in Beijing, and I will have, obviously, something interesting happens, talk to you about it. So I hope you found this interesting update on US-China relations. So please subscribe to Khanversations, like this video, press the bell icon. Don't forget to share it with your social political network. And until next time, I'm your host, Muqtedar Khan. Take care.